Approximately 30 years ago, the United Nations implemented something called Agenda 21, which is essentially their master plan for humanity, the agenda for the 21st century. And this 100-year-long agenda of theirs, it's broken down into shorter 15-year-long segments. The first 15-year plan was called Agenda 2015, or the Millennium Development Goals. And then currently, we are living in the second 15-year plan, the so-called Agenda 2030, which, at least according to UN documents, is the agenda to transform our world for quote-unquote sustainable development. And unbeknownst to many, many people, for the past 10 or so odd years now, this broad agenda from the United Nations has been trickling down and getting implemented as concrete policies right here in America. And so using things like the Endangered Species Act, WOTUS, the Waters of the U.S. Act, the Antiquities Act, as well as quite literally billions of dollars in federal money to either buy up land or to convince landowners to place conservation easements on their land, so it's technically still private, but you're just not allowed to develop it. Using all these different methods, the government has been taking land out of production in order to supposedly, well, save the planet. This is all part of the Biden administration's broad plan to place 30% of America's land and put it completely out of production by the year 2030. This would mean that 30% of the land would be placed into federal conservation, and it would essentially be idled. There would be no grazing, there would be no farming, no drilling, there would be no fishing, no developing, basically just no human involvement. And while the current aim is to take 30% of America's land by the year 2030, once that's actually achieved, well, the next step will be to take 50% of America's land by the year 2050. It's sort of a rolling project with the ultimate goal being for the federal government to own a majority of the land in America and to make that land inaccessible to the people in order to, again, save the planet. And while the people who live in the cities, in the urban centers, they don't really feel the effects of these policies in a visceral way, well, the people who live in the countryside, they do. They feel the encroachment of this federal government agenda on a daily basis. And so, while I was down in Texas, I took the opportunity to sit down and speak with Mr. Loren Patterson. He is a cattle rancher as well as the president of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association. And he broke down for us the very specific methods that the government has been using to lock up America's land, the corollary devastating effects that that is having on the ranchers, and how ultimately this will all lead to the erosion of American freedom. And so, take a super quick moment to smash those like and subscribe buttons and take a listen. Loren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So can you sort of give us a picture of New Mexico's cattle situation? Is it like predominantly big businesses, or is it small family-owned ranches? Can you sort of...
It's predominantly small family-run business operations, so where the family is the main labor source. They're the management source, but they sweep up too. So, we do have some of the largest ranches. They're not really conglomerates, they're family ranches, but they're acreage-wise, they're some of the largest in the nation. Cattle number-wise, they're some of the largest in the nation. But predominantly, it's a family atmosphere in our industry. But agriculture bounces between the second and third largest industry in our state, and livestock production is the largest part of the ag industry.
So, you're here at the Stop 30 by 30 Summit, and I know that over in New Mexico, 35%, close to 35% of the land is owned federally, 50% of the land is owned privately, and with, I guess, the missing chunk, I guess, state and local government would own that. What's the situation in terms of Agenda 30 by 30 in New Mexico?
So it's been a very rampant problem for New Mexico agriculture. And I say agriculture because there's multiple phases, not just the livestock industry that rely on that land. New Mexico is largely marginal land. It's not suited for a plow. It doesn't have irrigation. So grazing it is the best use. Grazing, recreation, but recreation and grazing can go hand in hand. So some of the 30 by 30 stuff is actually trying to take the grazing out as a multi-use purpose. And what we see is our tax base is being depleted in our rural communities because you take the cattle away, you take the tax away.
How's the government doing it? Are they just coming in and just buying up lots that are for sale?
Both. They're doing it they've passed the Land of Enchantment Fund, which is going to give them quite a bit of money to purchase rural properties, put them in conservation easements, those type of things. But then also the administrative state, we're seeing more and more regulation. Our animal numbers continue to go down and down, what we're allowed, permitted to operate on those lands. So, and then also in New Mexico, we're a high desert state, and water is life. And if you don't have the water, you don't have the life. So even for our livestock industry, we're not, as we see our water being taken away from us and taken to the urban areas or even just conserved, we lose that opportunity to operate on those lands.
I can imagine. The Land of Enchantment Fund you mentioned, can you sort of elaborate on that for someone who might have never heard of it before?
Well, so in New Mexico, it's kind of a funny situation. The number one business in New Mexico is petroleum. We have some of the highest producing Permian Basin petroleum fields in the nation. 35% of the state budget comes from those oil royalties, but they continue to push a green agenda against the oil companies.
The Land of Enchantment Fund, is that federal funds coming to the state, and then the state is?
So it's both. The state is allocating those funds, but it also gets a federal match, whether it's through the Inflation Reduction Act or other conservation funds within. One of the ones we killed that would have put money towards it was the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. You know, we kind of got that stopped, and that was going to put $92 million a year into New Mexico to actually buy property. And to be honest, as a rancher, as agriculture businessmen and women, we cannot outbid the federal government. When they decide to buy a piece of property, it's going to leave agriculture production.
Which endangered species are they using predominantly in the state?
So there's one huge one, and it's been one that's been going on we've been fighting for 30 years now, and it's the Mexican gray wolf. We started out with, they were going to put out a population, and the recovery goal was 129. Well, we're looking at over 300 head of wolves now, and they will not call it a recovered species. They just keep changing the goal post. They also keep expanding the recovery zone and what's critical habitat. So now 50% of New Mexico, the southern half, is considered critical habitat for the Mexican gray wolf. And so you cannot in any way harass those animals. I have to physically see that animal attacking one of my livestock before I can do anything about it. And then when we do have a loss due to wolves, to get the federal government to allocate money for the recovery of that animal's, the economic impact to a rancher, it's almost impossible. They keep changing the standards of what is a confirmed wolf kill. Well, they only pay the confirmed ones. They don't pay the probable kills, and they don't pay for animals that the wolves just stressed to death, which is they kill for sport. And I hate to say that. I mean, but until the ranchers are part of the recovery system for that species will never be safe. You have to bring the ranchers, the people who live in the communities, in on those recovery plans to be successful. The second one that we're really seeing a big uptick in is the lesser prairie chicken. And that would affect the eastern third of the state, and predominantly where the majority of our private land is. And so the lesser prairie chicken will drastically affect grazing permits, management of those permits. So we're going to have to manage around a species that really has had a very, very low population since the beginning of time. There just has not been a lot of lesser prairie chickens in our neck of the world, just because we don't have the water to support a wild game fowl like that. So My problem with the Endangered Species Act is very seldom do they have a baseline population to work from. They just assume that the population was better in the past. And that's not true. And of course you've heard about the meadow jumping mouse and how it affected one family. They have physically not seen that mouse yet. How can you take away somebody's livelihood when the animal's never been seen?